Welcome to the Rock Interview Series with host Thomas S. Orwatt Jr.
Welcome to episode number 49 of the Rock Interview Series. I'm Thomas Orwatt Jr. It is May 14th, 2022, and for this feature I have Neil Carter, guitarist, keyboardist, songwriter of the legendary hard rock band UFO, as my guest. In 1981, Neil jumped at the opportunity to join UFO, which was at the time one of the most popular bands in rock music. During this period, UFO also consisted of Phil Mogg, Pete Way, Paul Chapman, and Andy Parker. While with UFO, Neil recorded 3 records. He remained with UFO until 1983 when the band decided to break up. Neil rejoined UFO in 2019, soon after the untimely death of classic lineup member Paul Raymond. UFO will be touring for the final time this year and are scheduled to play their last show ever on October 29th in Athens, Greece. In addition to UFO, Neil has also performed and recorded with guitar legend Gary Moore from 1983 to 1989 and Wild Horses, which was a hard rock band formed by established musicians Jimmy Bain and Brian Robertson in 1978. We talk about this and much more during the following exclusive interview. So here he is, Neil Carter. Welcome to another episode of the Rock Interview Series, and this is a real special one for me. We are interviewing Neil Carter, the current guitar player, keyboard player, songwriter of the band UFO, one of my favorite bands of all time. Neil, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me. Let's start off with how are you doing? You just celebrated a birthday a couple of days ago.
God, yes, the Beatles' birthday. Yeah, the 64, evil 64 birthday. But yeah, fine. I mean, it's we've had a very quiet couple of years, so it's been nice. But I live down in the Canary Islands, so it's you couldn't ask for a nicer place to be all the way through all this horrible stuff. It's been really nice here, so it just carries on. It just life carries on.
You rejoined UFO in 2019, unfortunately after Paul Raymond passed away. I guess the first question I have for you about that is, did you was it an easy decision for you to make to rejoin the band?
Yeah, really, the oddest thing is I've not seen UFO since the day I left. I hadn't since the day we finished in 1983. So I hadn't seen them at all because I moved on to Gary Moore and then I moved out of the business completely. So I saw that UFO were doing their final tour, their Last Orders tour, and I happened to be in England. And I thought I would go to see them. I mean, it's very unusual for me. I haven't been to a rock concert for 25 years or whatever. I'd played in one with Gary, but I'd not actually been to one. So I thought I'll make the effort and go. And I was really glad I did because it was nice to see them. And it was only 2 days before the end of the tour. So Paul was a penultimate show. And it was great, and I didn't get a chance to go and say hello, but I just really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed watching them. And it was very warm feeling. So cut to sort of, I think about 2 weeks later, I saw that Paul had died, and they contacted me to see whether I'd carry on the tour with them, And it was really easy because I'd seen them and I thought how great they were and how much fun it was. And it was a no-brainer, to do it. I would have, had I been still working, full time, I would probably not have said so. But and if I hadn't seen them, I probably would have said no. But the fact it was just so easy, I just thought, yeah, great to be a part of it.
Yeah. What was the very first time back on stage with UFO like for you? I saw the YouTube videos and you guys were just like on fire, and you really were a ball of energy, and you have been every time, every show that I've seen on YouTube. You play like you're back in your 20s again.
It's weird, I had a different feeling to it going back to it because I had a long break. I mean, I did some dates with Gary Moore in 2010, and I didn't really, if I'm honest, I didn't really enjoy it too much. And so to go back with UFO, whose songs, I'd always loved the songs. I'd always loved the feeling within the band. And it was such a great pleasure to do it. And they, of course, had done a 5-week tour. So they were in gear. So for me, I just fitted in, just fitted in and off we go, So I'm never nervous at playing. I always enjoy playing. It's a thing within me that I just love it. I just love playing to crowds. And I'd forgotten I'd been out of doing anything like that for a long time, so I'd forgotten. So yeah, it's brilliant. I was really sad that we had to stop. It really was sad that we had to stop. You just get going and then you had to start to stop completely. So
yeah, that was very unfortunate because of the pandemic was like
it was a bitter
after.
pill. Yeah, and we had plans. We'd had plans to carry on. Phil sort of got a sort of new lease of life. I suppose it's just someone new coming in. I mean, it's no disrespect to Paul Raymond, but it was just someone different coming in with a different sense of humour and a different take on things, and it was like it sort of put fire into it a little bit, and so we were going to go to South America. We had a date in India planned. We had some more touring, and I would imagine had the pandemic not happened, we might even have considered doing something else, maybe doing a bit more, but Phil, I think this 2 years has sort of made Phil think, no, that's it, I'm going to hang my hat up, because we're well, not hang his hat up, but with the band, just it's 2 years is a long time. He's now 74, so he doesn't want to be away from home doing all these gigs and all the things that he's done for all these years, which I can quite understand.
Yeah, you're about to go on. You're at the final part of your tour. It's starting on June 20th.
That's right. Yeah. We're doing a couple of rehearsals, a couple of warm-up dates, and then we do some festivals in Europe, and then we do lots of Germany, lots and lots of Germany, and then we have a break of about 3 months, and then we come back again, and we do two more weeks, and then that is it. Apparently that is going to be the very end of it, which is extremely sad. But you have to sort of have to go with it. You have to sort of appreciate that everyone has done their bit over the years. So yeah.
Do you think there's a possibility that UFO could possibly continue as a band as far as recording songs and that, or do you think once October 29th hits, that's pretty much it?
Yeah, I think that will be it. Yeah, I mean, it's very sad. I mean, I have learnt with life to never say never, because I said I would never play again, and then I did, and then I said I'd never play again, and I did. So I don't tend to think that really you can ever guarantee anything. But I haven't really told you don't really sort of, not a subject I really bring up with Phil too much, because Phil is really, he's the driving force behind what we do. And I think due credit to Phil for 50 however many years now, of steering the band through various lineups and all the changes and everything that's come their way over the years. So if it really is down to Phil. So if Phil doesn't want to do it, then I quite respect that. And now I sort of feel like it's a little bit of a bonus for me now to be doing this. It's given me a bit of a new sort of take on life, for the while, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Coming back to America was fantastic for me. I never thought I'd come back to America. So, that was wonderful to do a tour, to do that tour. It was brilliant.
Yeah. With me living in Buffalo, New York, it's really important. You guys haven't played Buffalo in forever. And I was really hoping that it would happen, that this wouldn't be the final and the UFO, but it looks like it is.
I was hoping as well. I must admit, I thought, maybe. So, and we were even talking, about doing, like some bands do, residencies or whatever, and doing things like that. Maybe doing a week here and a week here and a week, whatever. But I just think, maybe there's only so many times that you can go back and do it again. You have to be truthful to what you say, and it was. When I saw this announcement about these final dates, it seemed very final. Even though I've been talking to Phil, on and off lots over the last couple of years, it was never really mentioned. So I think I just respect it. It's up to him. And I mean, Andy, we're all very far apart. Andy's in Texas. Phil's in England. I'm in the Canaries, which is 4 hours from England. Vinnie is in America. Rob's in America. So I mean, we are very far apart. It's not like we can just sort of join up just like that. It's quite a monumental thing to get together when we do. So I hadn't really thought about it until I came back to the band. So it is quite a sort of a feat of engineering to get us all in the same place at the same time. So I think but basically the band is based in Hanover in Germany, so that's really where everyone comes together, and then that's where we start things from, which is very different to how it was years ago. So.
Wow. All right.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask you some questions about your career, your timeline. So pretty much started off in 1978 with Wild Horses, a band that was kind of like an all-star band at the time. I mean, Jimmy Bain was the bass player vocalist. Brian Robertson formerly from Thin Lizzy was the guitar player and vocalist. Clive Edwards was the drummer. You were very young when you joined that band. Give us a little history on how you hooked up with Wild Horses.
Well, I'd had a tour. I did a tour with an English singer-songwriter called Gilbert O'Sullivan just before that, about 4 or 5 months before, and he sort of had a long career, and that gave me a bit of taste of it. So I knew I wanted to do something, and there was a little advert in the back of Sounds paper, the newspaper, one of the music papers, and it said, or not an advert, but it was a bit of gossip saying they were looking for someone young and not inexperienced, but young and fresh and no one had ever heard of, and to play second guitar. And I thought, well, that's going to be me. That's me. So I rang and went for an audition. And the drummer, when I went for the audition, was Kenny Jones from The Who. By the time we came to start rehearsing, it was Dixie Lee, who used to play in Lone Star with Paul Chapman. And then we did a tour with Dixie, but that didn't really work out. And then Clive joined in 1979, early 1979. So yeah, it was an all-star band. I mean, it was a bit of a strange one. They sort of done a lot of rehearsing, and they lived like they were headliners in a stadium. You know what I mean? That's how they lived. They were rock and roll stars, if you know what I mean, with that mentality. And for me, it was great because I was such a like aspiring wannabe. I really wanted to. That's the career I really wanted. To be in a rock band and play stadiums and do all that sort of thing. And on my drones. I don't think Wild Horses were ever destined for that. I mean, we only ever really played small clubs or small venues. And we did a couple of dates with Rush in a big place in London, near London. So we'd done a couple of things like that. But by the time it came to the end of my time with Wild Horses, I actually realised they weren't going to really set the world alight. So when UFO asked me if I was interested in joining, I sort of grabbed it, by the throat, because I knew that I didn't see it carrying on. Brian, they were characters. Brian and Jimmy were quite a handful and characters. So yeah. So
in retrospect, why do you think Wild Horses weren't able to move to to progress to the next level?
No, I suppose I know if I listen back to the album, there were a couple of good tracks, and maybe the second album is actually a little bit better than the one I didn't play on. Maybe it's a little better, I don't know, but yeah, there was a couple of good tracks, but there wasn't a place for them, and it was the beginning of the punk bit, and I don't know, it just didn't sit right at the time. I don't know whether a couple of years before it would have done better, and we should have really done a support. We did lots of very, very long tours of very small, sort of, I don't know, grassroots level venues. And actually, I think possibly if they'd have got a tour with supporting a good act, we did some dates with Ted Nugent as well, but if they got a support tour, that would have brought them to a bigger audience, if you know what I mean. But we tended to do clubs and things that were never really gonna break out from. And there was a couple of singles that reached the lower end of the charts. The album did go in the lower end of the charts in England, but it wasn't really the biggest market for them, actually, fun enough, was Japan. And after I left, they went to Japan and did a tour, and they were, they did some good dates. They were actually able to do a tour of good places, with all the connections, like the Rainbow connection, the Thin Lizzy connection, or whatever. So I think they had the better time after I'd left than when actually I was with them. But I was ready for a change by the end of that time. Yeah.
And then, like you said, you joined UFO shortly after that. The first record that UFO released with you in the band was The Wild, the Will, and the Innocent, which many feel is one of the best UFO records ever released without Michael Schenker in it. When did you join UFO as far as the recording of that record? Were you there from day one of the recording of that, or did you join midway through the recording of it?
Midway through it, yeah. They'd done Because they'd done the backing tracks. I know they'd done the backing tracks, and it just got to the stage where Phil was coming up with the lyrics, and there was quite a lot of it was done. So my contribution to that is minimal. It's actually minimal. I did all the backing vocals, and I did those the saxophones that no one likes, and so there's saxophone, and there's and there was an extra track that we did. We never saw the light of day, which Paul is like an acoustic thing that Paul Chapman did, and it's got flutes on it, and I mean, honest to God, it was so on UFO. But having said that, I always nowadays, I think, because I have a very strange take on life. I live life on a need to know basis, so I have not actually heard any of the albums before my albums with UFO, or any of the albums after. So I haven't listened to Obsession, or I never had those albums. I listened to the tracks from a recording of the live show, but I never actually had those albums. I didn't realize that Michael had played a recorder on one of those albums. So I actually didn't think to myself, I thought to myself after, well, the saxophone, all right, some people like it, but actually the recorder in my book is even worse. Sorry, Michael Schenker fans, but it's just one of those things. I thought it was quite funny. It was ironic that there was this funny little recorder thing, that recorders are to be snapped in half. They're not actually to be played. Saxophones are rock, they're rock and roll, but or they can be rock and roll, but it did make me laugh. I didn't realize that they'd had that on those albums. But yeah, so my contribution to that was quite small, but I did do a lot of backing vocals on Wild and Winning, So Phil never really did his own harmonies or whatever. So you'd have Phil doing the singing, the main line, and then I don't know, so I got mosquito, go away. So then I would fill in all the backing vocals and harmonies and all that sort of thing.
Was your ability to play saxophone one of the reasons that you were hired in UFO? Because I heard that Phil was in a Bruce Springsteen type mode and wanted to try to incorporate some of the Bruce Springsteenisms in his music at that time.
Yeah, there's a bit of urban myth about so much of this stuff, and of course if you read the Facebook UFO page, and they go on and on. But in fact, no, I'd only played the saxophone with a little bit with Gilbert O'Sullivan a few years earlier. I'm a clarinet player, so the way you play the saxophone, the way you shake your mouth is the same. So I could pick the thing up, and it has the same fingering in most of the registers as a flute. So I play the flute. So for me, playing the saxophone wasn't actually something I did. So when we recorded that little bit on Lonely Heart, we hired one in, and I fiddled about with it and came up with something. But they didn't hire me as a sax player. I'm not really. In subsequent years, I taught the saxophone and played the saxophone seriously, and had played jazz and all that sort of thing. But when I was with UFO, the saxophone wasn't one of my instruments. It was just something that we hired, and I fiddled about with and played. So the Lonely Heart thing isn't really, it's not exactly, state of the art sax playing. It's just there, But long term, that does sound a little bit Springsteen-y, I suppose. But it's an alto, it's not a tenor. Again, Springsteen used a tenor saxophonist rather than an alto sax player. So alto is much smaller, so it makes a higher pitch sound. So
I got you. Wow, that's a pretty incredible story. Soon after that record was released, you went on tour, at least in America. You was direct support for Cheap Trick. That tour, originally when it was booked, they were booked for hockey arenas, and I know at least in Buffalo they had a downsize to a theater size.
Right. Yeah.
That was kind of weird because at the time UFO was pretty much headlining theaters, and to see them open in a theater, the same theater that they played as a headliner, was kind of strange. What was it like in the band at that time, and what was that tour with Cheap Trick like?
For me personally, it was one of my first experience of playing, because we did play some large places, and it was my first experience of that. And of course, I've had an obsession with America since I was a little boy. And it's the first time, although I had been to the States before then, I'd never toured, I'd never played in America. So for me, it was like everything like Christmas had come. Every single Christmas for the last 30 years had come, So it was wonderful. For me personally, it was wonderful. I hadn't, because we did do quite a few of our own dates on the West Coast and in the Midwest and in Texas and all those sort of places. So we could go out and do decent sized venues, particularly in, we used to play Long Beach Arena. I think we did 2 nights there with Iron Maiden supporting. It's either 1 or 2. And so we did get to do our own bigger dates, you know. But I remember watching, they were playing Cheap Trick one night, and they were playing, I think it's Heaven Tonight. And I stood at the side of the stage, and they used to put the lights on the audience at that point. And I was practically in tears, because it was just like the culmination of a dream for me to be looking out at this massive, you know, crowd of people. You know, it was just wonderful, you know. And again, it was just new to me at the time. I'd played loads in England, but I'd never played in America before. So it was fantastic.
Yeah. And then soon after, you started recording another record called Mechanix, which came out in 1982. In America, you toured with Ozzy Osbourne, and that was the time that Randy Rhoads was in the band. Well, I guess let's talk about Randy. Did you have any interactions with Randy at all on that tour?
Yeah, quite a lot. I used to chat with him, and he was very, I mean, I'm sure people have said this, but very dedicated musician, you know, and used to sit and practice and play, and you know, he was a very nice guy. I say little boy, but it was a nice to me now. He seemed, you know, when I see pictures around him, he seems so young, you know. So, and I was probably maybe the same age, I think, around that time, maybe slightly older, maybe. So no, I just thought it was a fantastic guy, you know. And watching them, I mean, I've never been a massive fan of Ozzy's voice. I like Ozzy himself, and he's a very funny man, and he is an extremely funny guy. But you know, watching that band on stage, you know, with Tommy Aldridge, you know, Rudy Sarzo, and then you've got Don sitting up in the tower, Don Airy. It was a great thing to watch. But I must admit, I used to watch the audience and thinking 22,000 or 19 to 22,000 people going bonkers, and watching Ozzy sort of stomping around the stage. And, you know, I mean, it's a very strange thing. I've never quite understood the appeal of Ozzy, but people love him, if you know what I mean. They actually think he's, you know, the best things ever. But he's always had really good people with him. And I think they make him possibly sound, if you just had Ozzy on his own, it would be a slightly different story. But he had great songwriters with him, and he had people like Bob Daisley, who I worked with for a long time, writing the lyrics. And, you know, he's had very good people around him. And so that band was spectacular. That band with, you know, with Randy and Rudy Sarzo and Tommy Aldridge, which is absolutely incredible to watch. I used to just be in awe of Randy's playing. He was so good. He was so good, you know. So that tour was very sad, you know, for that to happen, and you know, also, you know, for them to have to slot another guitarist in, you know, and then yet another guitarist in, and it was just painful, you know. That second half of the tour was painful, because I felt so sorry for them, you know, really did, particularly Randy and Don, because Don Airy was on the site when it happened, you know, and I just felt he was sort of that must change the way you look in life and things in life, you know. I felt very sorry for them, really sorry for them.
Yeah, that was really one of the most shocking things ever that happened in rock and roll history. I feel
doesn't make sense, you know, when, you know, to you, you know, just think, is this possible? This happened, you know. It really is. Someone, such a young, talented person, to be snuffed out just like that is dreadful, absolutely dreadful.
Yeah. How was the reaction to you and to your other bandmates in UFO when you heard the news?
Again, you know, just total and utter shock. You know, we decamped to Florida, and I just don't think anyone wanted to talk about it particularly. You know, it's one of those things you do. It's almost like it's unreal. You know, I remember I think my ex-wife was out with us at the time, and we just went off on our own. We just spent time on our own, you know. And actually, the first gig back, you know, seeing sort of Rudy and Don, and it was just so difficult. You know, you don't know what to say. You know, you just don't know what to say to people. It's just beyond comprehension. You know. But the weirdest thing is actually, and it's all right to say now, but all the way through that tour, I always had a very bad feeling about something awful was going to happen, and I don't know why. And it started right from the beginning of the tour. I had this very, very uneasy feeling about it, and you couldn't say that something that dreadful was going to happen, but I had a really bad feeling all the way through the tour. I felt very uneasy with it, you know. And it was just odd. But I even before we were going to do it, I felt uneasy about it. So it's just, you hear Crazy Train, I can't listen to any of those songs, because it just reminds me of that, that time.
Wow,
So,
that's incredible.
Yeah.
So then sooner you guys finish off that tour, and then again you went into the studio to record a record. But in between that tour and your next record, bass player and original member Pete Wade had left the band. What led to Pete leaving the band at that time?
I think, there's a lot of urban myth about this. I think Pete wasn't happy with the direction some of the music was going in, and I think he possibly was, more than right. Perhaps we should have kept it a bit harder. Very difficult when you're in a band and you're touring constantly. You're touring in America constantly as well, so you're aware of American radio. You've got I would say the record company and management on your back, but you're aware that they want you to have a radio album. Def Leppard were extremely lucky to have an album that just hit American radio and sent them stratospheric. And you watch people like that, and AC/DC. The ironic thing is that AC/DC's Back in Black album, which are the top sellers ever in America, isn't a compromise at all. They're themselves. But I wouldn't say we changed our sound, but it's just having things around you. Everything was developing. The keyboards were developing. All the technology is developing. So Pete wasn't as happy, and we changed management as well. And I think Pete liked it the way it was. I can't speak for him now, unfortunately, but I think Pete liked things the way they were. And I just think it was just a combination of things. I don't, I read, you read things and you read what people say after the event, but I saw Pete just, about 6 months, about a year before he died, because we played in Sweden Rock. With UFO, and Pete's band were playing as well, and he was still the same lovable Pete, and there was never anything between him and I, but sometimes things are cited, like people in interviews and all that sort of thing, people say things, but that he was just unhappy with the direction of the music. And I don't think there was a marked change, but it was just, perhaps it was more produced and more, I don't know, I don't quite know. I've never asked him, so we just got quite a few different answers for the reasons why. So shame, because he was the heart of UFO, really. He really was.
Yeah, and then the follow-up record, Making Contact, which was released in 1983. You played a very, very big role in writing that record. You and Paul Chapman were co-writers on many of the songs on that record. What was that record like? The band decided not to bring in a bass player. Paul Chapman played bass on it. What was that time like in the band?
It was interesting. We got, in fact, actually, Paul and I just split the bass duties. Paul played the most of it, or like the lion's share of it. But it depended who'd come up with what. So sometimes, it just depends who was writing what and whatever. So we all went to a hotel in this awful place called Bexhill. No, that's could be a bad thing. A place called Bexhill-on-Sea, near Bexhill-on-Sea, which is an old seaside town in England. It's in the south coast. And we went to this hotel in the middle of nowhere, which is probably just as well to keep us away from, keeping us on track. And we just wrote the album. I'd had a lot of songs ready, because I used to, on tour, write a lot instead of going and getting drunk or wasting the time. I used to try and write in my room and spend, not all of the time, but quite a lot of the time, just coming up with anything and everything, putting it down on tape and then giving it to Phil, see what he liked and then what worked with us. And so it was a bit strange not having a bass player, but we, in a way it worked quite well, because it was only really Paul, myself. Once Andy had done his drum tracks, he went back to America. So it was really just three of us, doing Phil, Paul and I. Finishing it off, So I don't know. Some people like the album. Some people don't like the album. I don't really listen to much of what I did in the past, so I couldn't really. I haven't listened to it in a long time. But there's probably too many keyboards on it. But again, everything was developing. So you hadn't got these things, so you want to try them. That's the. I think that was it. It's like having new toys. You want to try the new toys out and play them, So, but it probably isn't. It's not a classic UFO, but it's another UFO. It's still got Phil singing of it, so it's
I thought it was a great record, and I'm really surprised that Chrysalis. I mean, I'm not sure how Chrysalis was at that point. If they were pushing these singles and it just wasn't that radio was accepting them, but I mean, there were some ballads on that song on that record that could have been huge. I feel.
I'd sort of got very much into American radio and American rock, and so I like listening to people like Journey, and I like Bryan Adams, the early Bryan Adams stuff. And I don't know really. My influences were coming from different places, And of course, the other thing, I keep forgetting this until I thought about it the other day, that I'm 64, Phil's 74, so my references musically are very different, to other people's. So I grew up, apart from being a classical player, listening to Roxy Music, David Bowie, Mark Bolan, all these people. There were very different references to me. So therefore, and Queen particularly. So I had more of a, operatic approach to things, and so I liked hearing lots of interesting things on albums. Not necessarily just two guitars, bass, and drums. I was more in. I never was into these bands. I was more into people that. I can still listen to Queen's albums, early albums, and get an absolute chill when I hear them, because I just think they're so clever for the time. They are way beyond what you would expect for that time. So I was always quite interested in what people did in the studio. How they developed stuff. How you made interesting music. Things more interesting.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that was exciting for me, especially from being in Buffalo, was on that tour that you went on for Making Contact. Billy Sheehan, who is from Buffalo and was in a band called Tellus, which I used to see all the time here in Buffalo. They used to play down the street at a club, and I used to sneak in because I was so young. But he joined UFO for a while. What was it like having Billy in the band? And was there any possibility of Billy staying in the band as a permanent member, or was it that just a temporary thing that was stated from the beginning?
Yeah, I think it was only going to be a temporary thing. Billy had his own projects going, and he is quite an incredible player. In fact, almost in a way, it slightly didn't quite fit as well as Paul Gray, who came after, because Paul is a simpler player, whereas Billy's a virtuoso bass player. So for us, it was great. It was good he could sing as well. It was quite good. So he would put some vocals in. And he's a very professional guy. And I think he's because the band was sort of in the process of dismantling in front of our eyes. I think poor Billy got, he couldn't quite believe what he was in. He got himself into because it was all going a bit south at the time. And there was too much. Outside influences driving some of the members of the band, So I think, but it was great. I got on with Billy really well. I like Billy a lot. He's, he's a professional to the last, and that's to be applauded, because we weren't always like that, We weren't always professional, So it was quite a stark contrast having him as opposed to Pete, who would shamble onto the stage and do his bit and be fantastic. But it's very very. I would say Pete's the only person I could ever have ever worked with that could be unplugged from the amp but still give it 100% and not even realise that he wasn't unplugged. Whereas Billy was totally on the money. He was totally professional and always there. Playing.
Yeah, I've read some interviews with Billy, and he just said that UFO, especially Phil, really struggled at that time with alcohol and drugs. How difficult was it being in the band and watching him self-destruct in front of your eyes like that?
It was hard. It was hard. I mean, it made, the weirdest thing is, going back to it now is so, polar opposites to how it was then. And I was sad. It was slightly, I wouldn't say bitter and twisted, but I was really upset at the end of it, which is like mid-1983, that I just felt the band I loved had the situation I loved had just gone like that. I was really... And it took me quite a long time to get, it sounds dramatic, but to get over it really, it took me years to actually really reconcile the fact that you can't change things, this is how it was and whatever, So therefore, for me to go back to it now and love every second of it and, get on so well with Phil now. He's one of the funniest people I have met in my life. And we just had the same sense of humor. We always did, but it was different because he was about that much older. And it's the age difference when you're 20, I don't know, 20, how old was I, 25, to someone that's 35 is quite a lot, when you're that age. So Phil and I don't feel then we really connected personally, whereas now we've all been through the mill. We all come out the other side, and it's just such a pleasure. Andy and I always got on well. Andy and I never had a cross word. We always got on well, and the same with Paul Chapman. He and I always got on really, really well. But Phil was he had his moments of being quite just different. I could try and put it in a nice way, but it was difficult sometimes. It wasn't easy, and he is just the opposite of how he used to be now. And I miss him terribly now because I don't get to see him. I saw him. I went back to England a few weeks ago, and I've actually seen him for the first time in 2 years. And it was lovely. It was lovely to see him. Because he lives very close to where he has a house very close to where I have a house in England. So I could I have to go and check on it occasionally. So yeah.
Was it difficult recording records with him? Because I heard rumors that he would sometimes wait till the very last second to present his lyrics.
Yeah, he was always quite, and that's no secret. I think I was reading Rod Stewart's autobiography, and I got the same feeling that he doesn't like it either. It's like this thing of having to finish lyrics, and I don't like writing lyrics either, I've got to be honest. So if I try, it's hopeless, so I think it is something, it's a very raw thing that you're actually having, singing a guitar down and a keyboard down or whatever, but actually coming up with a set of lyrics, I think is really hard. I take my hat off to Phil. I don't know who's managed it so many over the years, it was always, you were waiting for that. I did help him out sometimes with the vocal melodies, which would then give him a bit of a kickstart into doing things. But it wasn't difficult. It was just, we could always get on and do other things. But there is always this joke about George Martin saying to Phil, when they were doing No Place to Run, he used to come out to the pool and Phil would be by the pool and he'd say, there's a chance we can get some vocals down today, and it wasn't his way of working, Phil, but Phil would come up with lyrics at the 11th hour, but they were all the better for waiting for, I say.
Yeah. So I just want to make sure I have this clear. So in early 1983, you left UFO, or did UFO just break up?
We decided, we went Athens. It's all documented in books. I'm not saying the other we played a gig in Athens, the last one with Billy Sheehan, and it was a bit unfortunate because we'd been given these bottles of Mechanix brandy. These are like huge bottles of brandy by the promoter. This was not a good thing, and I think Phil's had gone by the time we got to the gig. So it had been building and building and building and building and building. And we just thought, we can't carry on with this. I mean, we were on stage and it went a bit wrong. And the audience was throwing cans at us, and it was horrible. So I think we said, look, we've got to stop. We have to stop, and we'll go back to England and we regroup, but we're not going to do any more dates. So we cancelled. It's unusual for UFO to cancel, but we cancelled the rest of the dates. And then we finished off. We said we're not going to do any more. UFO is now finished. We're going to do a UK tour, and that'll be it. So that was the end of it, allegedly. But then a year or so later, Phil got something back together with UFO, and again, it's right. He is the voice of UFO. So at the time, I was quite surprised. But I mean, it was good. He needed to work. He needed to go out and work and do some stuff because the affairs of the band were not very well managed. So all of us needed to work. None of us could. We're going to retire on what UFO had done up to that point, and that is quite surprising. I only started getting money from the songs I wrote from UFO about 2000 and something, and I had to go after the money, to get them, because it was just so chaotically managed, and eventually I got royalties going back to 1990 something or other, but it was a nightmare. It was an absolute nightmare. So so in 1983 we thought that was it completely.
Yeah. And it didn't take you long to bounce back, because you joined up with Gary Moore And I saw you guys play. You opened for Def Leppard at the Buffalo Memorial Auditorium. I thought you guys were fantastic, and it was great seeing you on stage. It really was. Being such a UFO fan, it was really awesome for me.
Yeah, it's that was really by default, because Paul and Andy and I, we decided we might try and write some things together and form a band of our own. That was the idea. But I don't know. I mean, I was singing, and although I'm happy to do bits of singing, I never saw myself as a frontman lead singer. It's not something that's in me. So we did some demos, and then I had a call from Gary Moore to say, would I go on and do this tour with him, because Don Airy had gone off and done something else, and it wasn't going to be permanent. It was not intended to be permanent. It was just to do that tour, and I sort of jumped at the chance to work with Gary, but also with Ian Pace and Neil Murray, who I knew really well. So and then through the course of the tour, Gary and I realised that it was going to be a good relationship and working relationship. So it was brilliant. It was a long tour, but I must admit, opening in a 3-act bill for Def Leppard was a bit strange, for me, because Def Leppard had carried the gear in for Wild Horses in 1978 at a gig in Sheffield, so they were the humpers at the gig, so it was a bit odd to be 5 years later playing all these places, opening on a 3-act bill. That was really strange. It didn't. I thought to myself, if Ian Pace, of the legendary Deep Purple, can do this and hold his head up, then I could do it. There's no reason. It was just a great thing to do. And again, there was no money from UFO. So I had to go and work. I had to go and actually get a job. And so luckily, my time with Gary Moore was lucrative. So it. But I had no money. I had no. If I didn't have my wage from UFO, I had to go and work. So that was, I think, it was the same for all of us.
Yeah. Has any of that material that you wrote with Paul and Andy after making contact, has any of that seen the light of day with Gary Moore, with anybody else, or that? Or
funnily enough, we said at the time, I said to Paul at the time, anything I've written, like a riff or whatever, if we're not using it, I will maybe use it. So when it came to Gary doing his Victims of the Future album, there's a song on that called Murder in the Skies, and that riff and all that stuff comes from a thing I did with Paul and Andy. All these things are actually on YouTube, believe it or not. So the demos that I did with Paul and Andy are on YouTube. But the strangest thing is we recorded a song called So Long, and it's fairly basic sounding. It's a demo, but it's a good demo. And I was watching Pete Way's funeral online, and I had no idea that Paul had taken that one and given it to Fastway. So they're playing all this thing, and I suddenly thought, I recognise that song. And suddenly there's my song and my lyric, which I'd written with Paul and Andy, because Andy had written the lyrics. Somebody cut at Pete Way's funeral. I had no idea they'd ever recorded it. So Murder in the Skies was, I don't know if you know that song, but it's quite a good, one of Gary's sort of, heavier rock songs. So that riff was the one that I'd come to Gary with. But people often say Empty Rooms was one of those tracks, but it wasn't. It was something else that I'd had while I was with UFO, but we'd never used it. So
wow.
But there's nothing else. It was only that one riff that saw the light of day, and the one that was used in Fastway that Paul went. And Andy said, they didn't record that, did they? I said, yeah, they did. Apparently they did. So it was quite funny. It was quite funny. Paul Chapman was a wily character, bless him. Well, I never knew they'd done it. I never knew that they'd used it. So.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So you what was your time like with Gary Moore? I mean, Gary Moore was doing pretty good business back then, and I saw a couple of shows, and I thought they were great shows, a lot of energy. You even did you did lead vocals for a couple of tracks during the performance.
Yeah, I liked that. Yeah, I really did like doing. I mean, Gary was all about the guitar. It took me a long time to realise this really stupid thing to say, but Gary was really about the guitar. So he was very tough on drummers and bass players, very tough on them. And I think it was because anything that unseated him, made him feel that the guitar wasn't able to sit nicely. So therefore, the reason why I ended up doing half the vocals was, well, quite a lot of the vocals, was because he could then play a bit more and he could concentrate on his guitar playing. I think that's what he wanted. Anyway, and our voices went very well together. You know, they fit very well together. So yeah, I mean, Gary's career, whereas UFO unfortunately had been on the downslide, Gary's career, although it was fledgling to a degree, but he was well known because of Thin Lizzy and all that, was on the uphill path. And during the time with Gary, it just built and built and built and built and built. So, you know, we did, I mean, what you see behind you is all the result of Gary's, you know, the work I had with Gary. So, you know, these were, Gary's sold lots of albums all over Europe and Scandinavia, and you know, not so much in America, but definitely, you know, big market in Europe and Scandinavia. So yeah, so it was yeah, so it was a good thing for me to be involved with that, you know, and the songwriting as well.
There were no UFO records that you wrote with them that were gold or platinum?
No, there's one silver for No Place to Run, which I didn't play on, but no, none of the others are from there. These are all, I have about 20 something, which are all from Gary, and it just happens to be up in here because this is my, we have a house, but the apartment, we have a separate apartment which I use to write in, and I use as my studio. So these have not been up on the wall for 25 years or more. So when we moved to this current house that we're in now in Canary Islands, my partner, I went away on tour and I came back and they were suddenly up on the wall, but they've not been up the wall. They've been in a cupboard for 25 years, but might as well, just for the while, have them up. You know, I think when I stop playing again, they'll come down again. So
yeah, that's very impressive. I mean, just what I can see from here.
Yeah, no, there's a few walls here. There's yeah, it's just nice, you know. It's nice. I know other people have them up on the wall. I never, like I said, I haven't. They went in a cupboard and then a loft, and they didn't come down for probably a good 20-something years, 25 years. Yeah. Wow. So yeah.
Wow. Well, Neil, I want to thank you very much for this time. This has been a really fascinating interview. But I do want to ask you one last question before we leave, and you kind of disappeared from the music business after Gary Moore. I think you were 30 years old and decided to walk away. Was it tell us what happened there? Why did you decide to walk away at such a young age?
Well, I didn't really. I suppose I got to the stage, I'd done everything that I'd set out to do. I've got to be honest. I hadn't really every mountain had been climbed, and I was a bit sort of, so it was bored with it, but I'd sort of got tired of the life, you know, at that point. And then Gary said he was going to go off and make a blues album. And we thought, okay, Gary's going to go make a blues album. So off he went. And I thought, well, he'll probably ring me, and, you know, once he's done it, got it out of the system, you know, we'll start. But in fact, Gary's blues album took off to such a degree that he never came back to playing rock music again until 2010. And I made it very clear it wasn't my thing. You know, blues isn't my type of music. You know, it's not at all. And I sort of went. It was like suddenly the you know, Roadrunner. You know, when you know the coyote reaches the edge of a cliff, and they I can't think if it's Roadrunner or not, but whatever. Or Wile E. Coyote reaches the edge of a cliff and runs out onto the cliff, and he's still running, but the cliff isn't below him, and suddenly you just go whoosh. And it was a bit like that with me. Suddenly the cliff got taken away, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I had no plans whatsoever. So I was partly complicit in it because I could have gone and looked for something else. You know, I mean, I was, you know, not unknown at that point, but I just didn't really want to do it. And I had about a year where I didn't really do very much. I wrote songs. I thought of having my own career. I played in a show in London, in the West End of London, which was bizarre. I did some writing. I went out to see Gary in Connecticut, and we did a bit of sort of, but there was nothing that I came up with that, you know, he was interested in. And I just thought, well, that's it. And so that was it, you know. So my partner said, you've really got to do something, because you cannot spend the rest of your life doing nothing. You're only 30, 31. So I started playing the clarinet again, and I just got into it. And then I became a teacher, then I became a head of music, the Department of Music, and then I became a music examiner. And I had a 20-something-year-old career being a teacher, and I loved it, absolutely loved it. I loved working with the kids. I had a massive concert band of 120 kids playing, and I had a swing band. I did things that I totally different things, and I got back to my sort of classical playing. and I didn't touch the guitar once until Gary came to me in 2010 and said, would I do a tour of doing the rock stuff? And he caught me on a bad day, and I sort of said, all right, okay. Yeah, I know. So it wasn't something I planned to do. I never was going to go back to it again.
Wow.
So, very strange. It's a very, very strange life. And then bizarrely, when I finished the stuff with Gary and Gary passed away, I said, I'm never doing this again. I sold my guitars. We decided to move down. We gave up work, moved down to the Canary Islands, and that was it. And I'm never working again. And that was how it was. And I just did a little bit of examining. So, but you can never say never. You know, I never thought that I'd be doing what I'm doing now again. You know, so it's great fun, but I never thought I was going to do it. So, yeah.
Well, I'm very glad that you're back. You're a dynamic force on stage, and I really hope that after UFO, you do something, maybe a solo record or stay in the music business.
I've had 2 years to try and do it. I might do it. I don't know. I'll see how I feel. It's funny because when the tour stopped, you know, it was all yeah, do some more. But you know, then you sort of get into the habit of just not doing anything. You know, so I'll see. You know, I'll see. It's all it's very hypothetical at the moment. I might. So.
All right. Well, Neil, thank you again for your time. And again, I really enjoyed this interview. I've been a big fan of yours pretty much since day one. When you joined UFO, and I went back and I listened to Wild Horses a few years back, and it was like, wow, this is like really great British rock. And of course, Neil was involved in it, so it was cool. And your work with Gary Moore was really good too. So I'm a big fan. I'll admit it. I don't care what people say, you know. But thank you very much for your time, and I'll let you know when this is posted. Okay, and best of luck on the UFO tour. I'll be watching all the videos on YouTube since you won't be playing in America.
Yeah, that's right. Because you always, when you look down the audience, now all you can see is fans. So so there will be some, I'm sure. Yeah. Good. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. Okay.
All right, Neil. We'll see you. Bye-bye.
See you. Bye-bye.